afternoon and welcome to Policing TV, where I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Andrew Watson. Andrew, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon,
Uh,
Bernard.
Andrew, you've got very extensive experience in the ICT space as Chief Information Officer for a number of organisations and companies, and considerable experience also in policing. And we're going to talk about some of that. Um, and not just in the UK, but overseas. And you've also very kindly offered to join us on the Policing TV team as an occasional presenter. So we'll talk about that in due course as well. Um, you've worked, for example, for Huawei as their global public safety advisor, for the London Ambulance Service in the UK as their chief information officer, as the chief advisor for Abu Dhabi Police, as the deputy director of information with the Metropolitan Police, chief information officer for the British Transport Police, and I could go on, but that will give our viewers an illustration of the extensive policing and ICT experience you have. Um, Looking back on that experience, what are the most memorable occasions that you can recall? Most enjoyable, perhaps most challenging, whether personally or professionally.
I suppose given where we are in the year, the first one certainly wasn't enjoyable, but you just reflect back 2 days to 7/7. I was only a year into being CIO at the Transport Police, and that was a day that every year causes a huge amount of reflection, and you suddenly realise the requirements that the front line really has, and also the ability of the front line to just scale up and step up when something like that happens. And it was a humbling experience to be around that, and to then years later move on and work for the ambulance service with people who were there that day as well, and see it from a slightly different angle. Yeah, that certainly is probably one of the most memorable things we did. Um, I'm having a bit of enjoyment at the moment. I'm working with the police force at the moment, helping them with their mobile data program. And I discovered recently their mobile data advisor, or their mobile data project lead, wasn't actually born when I first rolled out mobile data in Transport Police. And I thought, yeah, okay, that puts an age perspective on my experience here.
Also illustrates the wealth of experience that you have. I'm just going to
Well,
come back to 7/7 because, of course, as we record this, 2 days ago marked the 20th
it
anniversary
was.
of the London three tube trains and a bus bombing, where the British Transport Police, responsible across the UK for the transport system, would
Mhm.
have played a key role in the response. So, uh, quite quite an occasion. The 20th anniversary marked appropriately. Um, so that is one of the more, shall I say, challenging. Doesn't quite convey the depth of that, but challenging times. What about occasions when there was maybe a little humor, dark humor perhaps, but humor otherwise in the work that you've done?
I humor. Um, I, I could. I mean,
Thinking,
I
for
will
example,
reflect. Yeah.
I'm thinking, for
Hmm.
example, you travelled very extensively. I have travelled very extensively to a wide range of countries, and I don't know whether you're keeping track of the number, but in some of those travels, there must have been moments when you thought, "What on earth am I doing here?" And look back now and think, well, it may not have been entertaining at the time, but I've got the
There are
t-shirt sort of thing.
there are two things that spring to mind. One, I was in a Latin American country. I was changing countries. I mean, I think in the last 8 years, traveling the world advising governments and police all over the world. I think I've done 62 countries. So that's 62 sets of policing and home office activity, almost equivalent activity. And that in its, I mean, that's a whole interview in itself, is what happens when you start comparing policing. A general comment on that: you peer into the soul of a country when you understand how it polices itself, would be my general observation on that. But I was in one Latin American country Sunday morning, on the phone to my wife, just chatting away, getting ready to get picked up to go to the airport to go to another country, and there's gunfire. Now, you think, she quite rightly said to me, "What's that?" She thought it was fireworks. And I said, "No, they're having a gunfight." It's not unusual, but it's happened quite a few times when we've been here. I didn't realise till I got home how normalised that had become. That, there are certain, we worry about crime in this country and antisocial behaviour, and can you walk into your local Tesco's when there's a crowd of youths there? Do you want to go out in the street today, or do you want to give them 10 minutes to let the gunfight finish before we go in the car and drive to somewhere? The other one was a fantastic piece of advice from a chief of the Emergency Affairs Unit. That's actually their award to me there, the plaque from Ukraine. My first granddaughter was born days before I went to Ukraine, and we went down onto the river, to a riverboat, to celebrate. He invited me, and he said, "We will drink lots of vodka. And if you do not wish a hangover, do not drink cheap, rubbish Western vodka, and make sure you drink lots of cranberry juice." And that works. So you have big jugs of cranberry juice and and it was actually Lviv vodka. Unfortunately, there are many people in the West now starting to learn cities there. And Lviv is a fantastic ancient city in the middle of Ukraine. It makes its own vodka, and you can drink quite a lot of it, so long as you drink lots of cranberry juice. So best advice from a chief of police.
I wasn't expecting that alcohol-related tip. I'm sure it'll be well received by our audience, though. So maybe I shouldn't have said entertaining or
Oh,
humorous or whatever I said, but certainly memorable there. So you've seen many different policing jurisdictions. There will be differences in the policing style. There will be similarities. Let's start with the similarities. Do you see sort of shared themes in or challenges in each of the policing jurisdictions, or in many of them, or are they all completely different in what you see?
um, I suppose the biggest difference is then a lot of the um, British influenced, or that style of policing model where you go in at the bottom to come out at the top. So you have to join as a constable or whatever they refer to the bottom officer to get to the top. Um, brings a model of leadership that is quite risk averse. They have an aversion to change, that, not total aversion, but they're more reluctant and more cautious around change. Um, Whereas in many of the countries that I've been to, the most senior roles can be direct entry, right up to the chief of police, the chief constable, the commissioner of police. You can come straight in at that level. And in one country that I worked with extensively, they've recently just changed their commissioner of police. And everyone kind of assumed that the deputy commissioner was the shoe-in. Nope, a senior superintendent wowed the panel, stepped 3 ranks up and became commissioner. And it's the sort of thing that is just not an option in in the traditional policing style that I'm used to from the UK. And that that leadership, that's a hybrid between in at the bottom, out at the top. But for the ones where you can come direct entry into the chief officer group, they have a very different attitude to change. They will rapidly adopt things because many of them some have come from a business background. and they look at the benefit case. The benefit case is good, then they just go. Um, and that is one. The other one is when you talk to the frontline officer, they are a breed of people generally who share very common similarities. The people that join to be police officers do it normally out of a sense of wanting to make their community and their country a better place. And I've very rarely found that, even in some of the regimes that people might roll their eyes at, the frontline officer is there to keep the peace, prevent crime, protect property. They're there to do that job.
So there are similarities, there are differences, and as you embark on your policing TV career, I'm sure that you will identify interviewees who are able to flesh out those similarities and differences and build on some
Mhm.
of the learning from that. Do you miss the travelling?
I I did 1 year. I did 220 days out of the UK. Now that's weekends as well, because 220 days is notionally in the UK a working year. Um, so it's not quite, it doesn't quite compare, but effectively an entire working year out of the UK. I've been fortunate. There are a few things I've missed that I would like to have been here, but I was normally quite good with managing that. I mean, I used to joke that Heathrow Departure Lounge, the lounge at Heathrow, was my second home. Um, I've also got to an age when maybe that's not what I want to be doing every week. Which country this week. Um, and if you ever go to Latin America, especially the Caribbean, you become best friends with one of the most awful airport experiences in the world, which is Miami. Transiting through Miami, your experience depends on where you've come from and where you're going to. Whether you check your luggage in, don't check your luggage in, have to come into America and come back. And if you do a multi-country trip to the Caribbean, you spend a lot of time flying in and out of Miami. And
So
it's
you're not
just tiring. I mean, I can see 60 coming towards me, and I'm thinking, a lot of time sitting on aeroplanes, and it's not. I've got grandchildren and everything else, and I'm not sure that's really what I want to be doing now. Less of it, yes, I could still do. The same intensity, maybe not. Although the experiences are always good.
So you won't miss Miami, that's very clear, and or at least the airport. But some of the travelling you might actually miss. Well, then let's just come to the close of this first conversation with you, because I'm sure we will have further conversations and recordings, as you will. And whether it's for Andrew's skills or indeed the World Policing Advisory skills, don't hesitate to get in touch with one or both of us. Who are you hoping to bring into the studio to talk to?
I think it would be useful to see if we can reach out to some of the countries where they have some fairly unique challenges. There are countries that we go to as tourists from the UK where they are second, third, fourth highest in the murder rate in the world. And we go there without really realising that because of the way it's presented as a country. Um, I think there's also different approaches to the same technology. Body worn cameras are a classic example. I despair in the UK about our body worn cameras, but I look at the technology that's available. Now I've had an advantage because of who I've worked for the last however many years. I've had access to the absolute bleeding edge of that technology, and we're operating on technology in the UK that's essentially the same technology that was available when I was doing this 10, 12 years ago. We haven't really stepped forward, really. Um, be interesting to try and compare top to bottom. I think would be interesting, and can we get the most senior leaders and some operational officers, maybe from different forces, to make sure we don't get people into career problems by being adverse, overly critical, but the comment from the bottom up to the top down is always quite interesting to compare. Um, and and we also need to be careful. One of the things you had to do very quickly in the job I moved into was within a matter of weeks, if not months, myself and some other colleagues who joined with similar backgrounds, we had a chat and decided we were there to sell, not tell. You can't take the UK policing model and say this is how you need to do it, because there are all sorts of historic and cultural issues from that approach. So over 8 years, I think there has been a really big thing on listening carefully to what people are telling you and advising them on how they could think about things differently, but never telling people what to do. Because apart from anything else, that's a sensitive issue to senior officers.
Absolutely. And look, I can already tell, Andrew, there's going to be a great deal of fascinating interviews that you'll be able to facilitate for Policing TV. Much more that we could cover, and I'm sure we will in the weeks and months that are to come. But for the time being, I'm going to draw our own conversation to a close. Uh, Look out for Andrew's videos. I'm sure they're going to be fascinating to watch. So, Andrew Watson, for the time being, thank you very much indeed.
Bernard, thank you.